My name is Mia. I'm 38 years old, a lead data analyst at Ironline, a family-owned logistics company based in Ohio, where every major decision seems to revolve around the Stenson family. I was assigned the biggest project of my career, developing an intelligent pricing system capable of predicting shipping costs in real time, automatically adjusting for fuel fluctuations, warehouse congestion, and market demand. If successful, the system could save Ironline at least $2 million, 0 cents every year. I spent over 14 months programming, testing, and fine-tuning each variable meticulously. No weekends, no vacations, just me, a massive data set, and lines of code running overnight. I taught myself Python, R, and advanced SQL with old books borrowed from the town library. Sometimes I worked so much my hands would stiffen, and I had to soak them in hot water to move them again. But I didn't complain. I didn't ask for anything. I believed that if I kept pushing, the results would come. Then one day, I heard muffled laughter coming from behind the executive office door. I was working late, as usual, the desk lamp casting light on the piles of red-marked paperwork. I stood up to grab some coffee when I overheard a familiar voice from the senior HR lounge, a place I had never been invited to. Once she submits the final file, we're good. You're taking her place. The smug voice was Bryce's, the CEO's son and now vice president of strategic development. I promised you, Kendall. You'll get the new title, the new office, and don't worry, that girl won't suspect a thing. She's the type who thinks loyalty gets her somewhere. I froze. Kendall, a 24-year-old marketing intern who specialized in posting fashion ads on TikTok, and who had once asked me how to use Excel, was the one lined up to replace me. I didn't mishear it. I wasn't imagining things. Bryce's words kept echoing in my head like an alarm. Once she submits the final file, we're good. My chest felt heavy, like something was blocking my breath. I stood frozen in the hallway, my hands clenching at my sides. I had silently endured the changes over the past few weeks. Meetings I used to lead suddenly became executive only. Internal emails stopped being sent to my inbox. Kendall started sitting at my desk when I went out for lunch, telling everyone she was learning to take over the big project. I knew something was off, but I never expected them to be so blatant. I didn't scream, didn't rush in to break down the door. I quietly returned to my office, locked the door, opened my computer, and began backing up the entire system I had painstakingly built. Staying silent didn't mean accepting defeat. I refused to be pushed out like an old chair just because I wasn't pretty enough or didn't have any special connections with the leadership. What they didn't know was that the most crucial part of the system, the central algorithm that processed all the pricing data and flow, had never been uploaded to the company server. I wrote that part separately, on my personal laptop, in my small bedroom during the cold nights when the whole city was asleep. No one had the right to erase my work. No one had the right to call me blindly loyal. I knew exactly what they thought of me, but from that moment on, I decided, if they didn't think I was worth keeping, I would make them feel the cost of underestimating the person who created the foundation they were standing on. The next morning, I arrived earlier than usual, sitting at my familiar desk in the windowless room where the cold fluorescent light was the only thing that kept me awake for over a year. On my desk was a hot latte from the coffee shop on the ground floor, accompanied by a handwritten note in purple ink. Mia, I took the wrong flash drive yesterday, leaving it here. Thanks for always helping Kendall. I stared at the note, unsure whether to laugh or slam the desk. Did she think I was the office gatekeeper? None of the management team had mentioned I was about to be replaced. No one had informed me that Kendall was temporarily supporting the project. But for over a week, I had been unable to access the internal team dashboard. Every request for access returned a permission denied error. When I directly emailed the lead engineer, Carson, the same one who used to drink beer with me after every system test, he replied briefly, "There's probably a change in permissions. Let me check with Bryce." When everyone started responding with avoidance, you know you're being pushed out. Bryce still played the role of the model leader. Occasionally, he'd walk by my desk, pretending to be friendly. You seem stressed, Mia. Make sure you rest. Don't wear yourself out. I just smiled faintly. He didn't need me to stay sharp anymore, just enough to submit the final product. That afternoon, when Kendall walked into my office without knocking, holding her laptop, I wasn't surprised. And can you help me with the Florida route pricing? I think it's not working, probably because of the new DAX formula I added. I nodded, took her laptop. Just as I expected, she had messed up the entire data structure. Worse, she was experimenting on the only version of the system on the company server. Kendall, you're working in the wrong environment. This is the real system. Any errors you create could affect thousands of orders out there. Oh, really? I thought this was just the sandbox. I didn't respond. I just silently made a note of it. This was the reckless game they were playing with the company's reputation. That night, I opened my safe at home and took out the SSD containing the most recent, complete backup of the system. Not just the code files, but the full change logs, AI model tests, and logs that proved I was the only one who had built the core structure. When you work with sensitive data for over a year, you learn to prepare for the worst. Not because you fear losing it, but because you don't trust others to uphold their commitments. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't complain. I didn't write long, emotional letters on social media. I just kept working as if everything was normal. Submitted reports on time, fixed the broken modules caused by Kendall without leaving a trace. I wanted them to think I still trusted them. That Friday, I passed by the conference room on the upper floor and saw Kendall sitting next to Bryce, presenting a part of the pricing model in a trembling voice. On the screen, I saw the graph I had spent 6 weeks fine-tuning, now credited to, presented by Kendall S. I stood in the hallway, gripping my iced coffee tightly. I didn't walk in. I didn't need to anymore. What I needed, I already had, and what they needed, they were about to lose. That very night, I reviewed my employment contract, Clause 17.3. All intellectual property developed during work hours and on company devices is the property of Iron Line Logistics. I laughed. All the key updates to the system, from the logic coding for routing to the deep learning AI predicting cost variances, had been developed at home, after work hours, on my old Ubuntu laptop, connected to Wi-Fi, named Mia_works_hard. Every line of code had a timestamp, and I had saved everything with screenshots, videos of the process, and system logs. I wasn't just protecting the product, I was protecting my reputation. I knew I was standing at the threshold of a new game. A game they thought I was already out of. The next morning, the rain drizzled steadily, even before the sun had fully risen. I arrived at the office at 7:10 a.m., earlier than usual. The sixth-floor hallway was still quiet, with only the sound of the photocopier in the technical department echoing. I pulled out the key to open my office door, set my bag down on a chair, and before I could start up my computer, my phone screen lit up. Mia, please come to the 8th floor meeting room at 8 a.m. HR will be there. Amanda, HR. I froze for a few seconds. No more explanation was needed. I knew exactly what awaited me behind that glass door. At exactly 8 a.m., I walked into the executive meeting room, the one with the glass walls overlooking the parking lot in the back, where the leaders' SUVs always parked closest. Bryce sat in the middle of the table, wearing a light blue shirt, spinning his Mont Blanc pen as though displaying his power. To his left was Amanda, the HR director, in her 50s, small in stature and always speaking softly, even when delivering news no one wanted to hear. I chose to sit across from Bryce, my arms crossed. No need for preambles. Mia, thank you for being on time, Amanda started. Today, we want to discuss a strategic restructuring direction. I glanced at Bryce. He didn't say anything, just shrugged as if this was none of his concern. Amanda continued. The board has reviewed the goals for the next quarter, and we've realized that some positions no longer align with the company's growth direction. I cut in, my voice calm. So, I'm being fired? A few seconds of silence hung over the room. Bryce finally spoke. Not exactly, Mia. It's just we need people with more flexibility for this transitional phase. I smiled. Flexibility like Kendall, perhaps? Amanda hesitated. Bryce gripped his pen tightly but maintained his composure. Mia, this isn't personal. We truly appreciate your contributions. But the pricing project is moving into commercialization. Marketing needs to be more integrated, and Kendall, an intern who can't even write a clean line of code, someone who doesn't even know the difference between an independent variable and a dependent variable in a linear model, I interrupted, locking eyes with Bryce. She's the one leading the commercialization phase. No one answered. I pulled my employment contract from my bag, opened to the page I had marked earlier, and turned to the section on termination of employment and intellectual property clauses. I pushed the copy toward them and said, I'll hand over the internal accounts, but all the core code for the system, the part that's saving the company millions, doesn't belong to the company. You can check the IP addresses from each commit. It's all from my personal network after work hours. Amanda furrowed her brow. Bryce suddenly sat up straighter, the confidence he usually wore slipping for the first time. Are you threatening us? He asked. No, I replied, standing up, my voice firm but not loud. I'm stating a fact. I don't want to argue or sue, but I won't let anyone put their name on my work and throw me out like I'm obsolete. I gathered my papers, slipped them back into my bag, and gently pushed my chair in. Thanks for confirming what I've suspected for a while, I said, still not breaking my gaze from Bryce. You tried to hide it, but unfortunately, you weren't very good at it. I turned and walked out, not looking back. As the door closed behind me, I heard Bryce slam his pen onto the table. As I walked down the hall, I saw Kendall chatting on the phone with someone at the reception desk. She wore a beige blazer, leaning against the counter as if she was already familiar with the position. I didn't stop, just looked at her for a brief moment, enough for her to flinch, then quickly straighten up. I stepped out of the building, the light rain still falling, the wet pavement reflecting the gray sky above. But I felt light. Strangely, there were no tears, no fear, just a cold clarity, as though I had just closed an old door to prepare to open a new one, where I held the key. I went home, turned on the kettle, then sat down at the wooden table by the window. My laptop was open, the external hard drive connected. I checked over all the project files, encrypted them with my personal security layer, then logged into my personal email. In the draft folder, there was already an unsent email with a concise subject line. Pricing module complete independent version? I added one more line. Ready to offer under a consulting agreement. Please reach out to discuss terms. The recipient, not Bryce, not Kendall, not Amanda, but the three largest logistics partners on the East Coast. I sat in silence in my small room, the light from my computer screen illuminating my face. Outside, the sky had turned gray, heavy clouds churning as if waiting to release a storm. I no longer felt fear. I no longer felt pain. Everything I was doing now wasn't for those who had abandoned me. It was for myself. The day before, after walking out of the Iron Line building, I shut the door behind me and sat down to think. They hadn't just taken my work, they'd stripped away my right to be acknowledged. I was the one who had built the pricing system the company was depending on, and now I understood one thing clearly. Without me, they would never be able to pull themselves out of this crisis. The flaws in the project would soon surface, and that would be my opportunity. I didn't rush to respond to the calls or emails from Iron Line. I didn't want to react too quickly and let them think I still needed them. I wanted them to feel my absence. Because while they were desperately scrambling to fix the system, I had been quietly preparing everything so they'd have no choice but to ask for my help. I opened my computer and pulled up the backup folder I had created a month ago. The full, most up-to-date version of the system I had developed sat quietly on my external drive. This was what they had underestimated. They thought everything already belonged to them, that they had control. But they were wrong. Every line of code, every part of the software I had written It wasn't theirs, it was mine. And I would use it to force them to acknowledge that. 1 week later, the call I had been waiting for finally came. Mia, this is Carl from compliance. We urgently need your help. Some modules in the pricing system are failing and it's not functioning as expected. Carl's voice was panicked, strained. He had no idea that I had prepared for this moment. I smirked, not rushing to respond. I waited just a little to let the panic in his voice settle into the air. That feeling? It was almost satisfying. At last, I spoke. Seems like the company has a serious issue, Carl, but I'm afraid I can't assist unless a few conditions are met. I can help you restore the system, but it has to go through a consulting agreement. And of course, I won't be doing it for free. I paused, letting the pressure sit heavily on him. If you truly need me, reach out through my attorney. Everything will be handled under a formal contract. There was silence for a few seconds. Carl didn't respond immediately. That's when I knew I had the leverage. Over the following weeks, the calls from Ironline kept coming. They emailed, messaged, even sent urgent requests from the finance team, the tech department, and the strategy division. None of them included me. And clearly, they couldn't grasp just how bad things could get without someone like me to fix it. I read every one of those emails, but didn't reply right away. I let them sit, little reminders that they were lacking someone they once thought was easily replaceable. Then one day I received a call from Eleanor Riggs, one of the highest-ranking executives at Ironline. She was the only person I still had a sliver of respect for, because throughout my time there, she had always been fair and direct. Mia, we really need your help. This project is more critical than we realized, and the situation is becoming urgent. Could you help us fix this? This time, I didn't stay silent for long. I had already prepared my response. I can help, but not for free. And I won't work under Dean again. I want full control of the project and the freedom to manage it my way. She must have heard the change in my tone. She didn't ask further, only promised to bring my terms to the top. And I knew this was it. I wasn't returning as a savior. I was returning as someone with demands. While waiting for their response, I drafted a detailed contract outlining intellectual property rights, consulting terms, and the fees I would require. I also insisted on full autonomy, free from interference, especially from Dean. A week later, I got Eleanor's reply. The company had accepted my terms. When I stepped into that meeting room one final time, I knew I wasn't just returning to a project. I was returning to claim the recognition I had always deserved. Ironline was about to relearn a crucial lesson. No one is as replaceable as they once believed. I didn't return to Ironline right after hearing back from Eleanor Riggs. Even though she confirmed that the board had approved the terms of my consulting agreement, I wanted them to keep struggling a little longer. Only when they truly realized that no one but me could fix the mess they were in would they understand what they had lost. For the next 3 days, I didn't send over a single line of code. I only sent Eleanor one email with the subject line, "Ready to begin upon full assurance of independent oversight." Below my signature, I attached the simple logo of the company I had just founded. M. Carter Systems, Precision by Design. That night, I received a message from an unknown number. "Mia, I know I messed up. Please call me back. Bryce." I locked my screen immediately. No need to read further. His regret came far too late, and it changed nothing. That Friday, 1 week after I left the company, Ironline officially announced a press conference, delaying the launch of the new pricing system. They blamed it on unforeseen technical issues. Internally, however, everything was in chaos. I knew, because one of the senior engineers, Mark, called me quietly from his personal number. "Mia, I don't know what's happening, but Bryce told us to keep running the model on the main server, and it's all returning null errors. The interface is wrecked. The pricing files are full of negative values." I paused a few seconds before replying. "Sounds like they're playing with an incomplete version." "Mia, sorry to ask this so directly, but do you still have the complete one, the original?" "I do, and I'll only deploy it once the agreement with Ironline is legally binding." He let out a long sigh. I knew Mark wasn't on Bryce or Kendall's side. He was the kind of person who just wanted the work done right. Unfortunately, that no longer seemed to be a priority at Ironline. I opened my laptop. On the screen was the folder containing core module underscore M pricing v1.6, the final version of the predictive pricing system. That module was the heart of the entire framework, calculating real-time freight costs based on historical data, current fuel prices, inventory, and, most critically, a deep learning algorithm I had written myself. Something no one else at the company had ever fully understood. I had never uploaded it to any Ironline server. From the start, I had planned ahead. I built it on personal equipment during late night hours when the only light in my apartment came from the kitchen lamp. I still remember sitting there, holding a mug of cold tea, typing line after line of code, like I was laying brick for a fortress that only I had the keys to. Throughout the chaos, I kept watching, not because I cared about them, but because I wanted to see, step by step, how the system would collapse without the one piece I'd never let them touch. I read leaked reports, early feedback from clients testing the beta, all of it dismal. Estimates off by 15% from actuals. Can't generate pricing for remote zones. Auto update function not responding. I sipped my coffee, unbothered, like I was checking the weather. They were spiraling. And for the first time in months, I could breathe without feeling pulled into a whirlwind of power games and manipulation. Then came a Monday afternoon, and Eleanor Riggs appeared on my Zoom screen again. No assistant, no cold backdrop behind her, just a simpler room with soft yellow light from a nearby window. Mia, I'll be direct. We want to restore the original module, all of it. We're ready to sign the consulting agreement exactly as you outlined. And one more thing. Would you be willing to take on the role of Director of Pricing System Development, reporting directly to the board? No intermediaries, no breath. I sat quietly for a breath. I wasn't surprised, I just needed her to say it out loud. If I agree, I want full control over the technical team. And I want Carter Systems to be officially recognized as the lead developer. And we're prepared to sign within 48 hours. I've told the stakeholders we can't save this project without you. At that moment, I didn't feel victorious. I felt justified. Not because I got revenge, but because for the first time, I had the power to choose how I returned, not as the inheritor of a broken mess, but as the one rebuilding the foundation. After the meeting, I closed my laptop. As I got up to pour another cup of coffee, I realized my hands weren't shaking anymore. Ironline needed me, but more importantly, I no longer needed them. I looked out the window. The autumn sky was clearing. The heavy gray clouds had thinned, and for me, it wasn't just the start of a new day. It was the beginning of a game where I finally made the rules. On Wednesday morning, I wore a high-neck white shirt and a black blazer. My hair tied up and makeup just enough to show I was no longer the technical project lead I used to be. I was now an independent consultant representing Carter Systems, and today's meeting was about a deal that would shape the future of an entire company. The meeting was held in a conference room outside Ironline's headquarters, as per my request. I didn't want to step into that building again until everything was signed and sealed. The conference room was on the 18th floor of an office tower in Columbus, with clear glass windows overlooking the highway, a reminder to them that no one was irreplaceable. On the other side of the table, Eleanor Riggs appeared with a thick contract, accompanied by the board's legal advisor. Bryce was nowhere to be seen. I didn't ask, but I quietly guessed. Either he had been suspended or he was hiding behind a company leave of absence. Eleanor began. Mia, thank you for coming. We've reviewed all the terms in the agreement. The board fully agrees with your requests. I nodded, including the clause recognizing Carter Systems' intellectual property and brand ownership in all documents related to the pricing model? Exactly. You will be listed as the official developer of the final version. Additionally, all future collaborations will be under a consulting contract with no further involvement in the staff position. Their lawyer passed the agreement over to me. I read it carefully, line by line, not only to verify my rights, but also to see what they had learned from the recent events. Every term was exactly as I had proposed. I signed the document. Eleanor smiled faintly, as though a burden had been lifted. I also want to say, Mia, I'm sorry I didn't intervene earlier. I saw the favoritism, but I stayed quiet, thinking it wouldn't have too big of an impact. I was wrong. I didn't respond immediately. An apology from someone like Eleanor, someone who had always been firm and observant, wasn't easy for her. But I wasn't here to hold a grudge. I was here to claim what I was rightfully owed. Thank you for saying that, but instead of apologizing, let's focus on restoring the system. What's the current situation? The lawyer stepped back and Eleanor opened her tablet, presenting a quick report. The pricing system was on the verge of complete collapse. 3 major clients had suspended implementation due to data errors. The operations department was overwhelmed with manual adjustment requests. A lawsuit from a client was looming because the pricing tables had an 11% discrepancy for the entire Northeast transport contract. Where's Bryce? I asked. Eleanor sighed. The board has suspended him for 30 days for an internal investigation. As for Kendall, she's resigned after being caught altering the code logs and putting her name on logic she didn't write. I smiled. The storm had finally cleared away the untouchable names. 2 days later, I stepped back into Iron Line. This time as a partner, no longer as an employee who was fired. The glass door opened, and I felt the eyes of everyone on me. Surprise, wariness, and even some gratitude. A few of the old engineers, the ones who had quietly branched off to code with me, waited in the hallway, nodding their heads at me with knowing glances. Mark, the only one who had called me during the chaos, came up to shake my hand. Welcome back the right way. I entered the technical meeting room, opened my laptop, and connected to the system. My original module ran smoothly, every piece of data processed accurately, no error warnings. The dashboard displayed fully, clean, bright, and accurate, just as I had designed. No one said anything. Everyone was focused on the screen. Some sighed in relief, others hit the note button. I looked around the room. Once a domain of deception and manipulation, now operating under my lead. The technical meeting lasted 3 hours. Before leaving, I left behind a document titled Restoring Trust, a 14-day plan to save the system and brand. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to make any grand statements. My presence here officially said everything it needed to. Ironline hadn't invited me back just to fix a mistake. They invited me back because they had no other choice. 2 days after the initial system restoration, I received an invitation from Ironline's board to sign a long-term contract as Director of Strategic Pricing Systems, a title that sounded powerful, even symbolic. But I didn't respond right away. I knew I was in a position where they needed me more than ever. And this time, no one was going to define my worth except me. I requested a private meeting with Eleanor Riggs. No legal reps, no assistants, just 2 women who used to be silent adversaries in a broken system, now forced to sit face to face as equals. We met at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of Columbus, far from Iron Line's logos and the eyes of the curious. I slid a folder across the table toward Eleanor. These are my terms. Before I accept any title, everything needs to be written, signed, and clear. Eleanor skimmed the title page, then looked up. You're asking for full ownership of the core algorithm to remain with Carter Systems? Exactly. Ironline will have non-exclusive licensing rights renewed annually based on performance. Any copies, modifications, or integrations must receive my approval. Oh, I've never seen a clause like this in any previous agreement. And I've never been fired only to return to rescue what I created. We're in uncharted territory, Eleanor. If Ironline truly wants to rebuild, it starts with transparency and rightful recognition. Eleanor was silent for a while. I knew she was weighing the legal and political risk. But I also knew they had no other option. My system was the only thing keeping their operations and pricing data from collapsing like dominoes. What else? She asked. I flipped to the next page. I won't work with the old technical team. I want to build my own. People who value discipline, accuracy, and transparency. I have 4 engineers and 1 data analyst, all of whom have freelanced with Carter Systems in the past year. They're the only ones I'll lead. Eleanor nodded slightly, no objection. I also want full control of the project timeline, resources, and key technical decisions. No filtering through marketing, no filtering through strategy leads. If the board needs updates, they'll get them directly from me. No Bryce. No one like Bryce. We looked at each other for a moment. She didn't flinch, didn't agree immediately either. Just the silence of someone used to giving orders, now learning to negotiate on equal footing. Finally, Eleanor spoke. I'll present these conditions to the board by tomorrow afternoon. But Mia, do you really want to return to a place that once cast you out? I took a sip of my tea, calm. Not to return, to rebuild, on my terms. The next afternoon, I received confirmation by email. All terms were approved. The official signing would take place Monday morning in Iron Line's headquarters' 11th floor conference room. When I walked into the main lobby on signing day, the receptionist greeted me by my new title. Good morning, Director Carter. On the LCD screen by the elevators, a message scrolled across. Welcome, Mia Carter, Director of Strategic Pricing Systems. I didn't say anything, but as I passed the office where Bryce used to sit, I paused for just a beat. His nameplate, Bryce T. Weller, Strategy Director, had been removed. The room inside was dark and empty. The elevator stopped on the 11th floor. I walked into the conference room, signed the contract with a steady hand, eyes forward. My name was no longer just a line in the system. It was the start of a new era, one I designed. As I stepped into the hallway, a young employee hurried up to me, hesitating before asking, Mia, can I ask for advice on becoming a lead engineer like you? I smiled, looking him straight in the eye. Start by knowing your own value, then never let anyone else define it for you. Within less than 2 weeks of the official contract coming into effect, Iron Line's pricing system was back up and running smoothly. So much so that even the staunchest skeptics had to fall silent. The errors in cost prediction disappeared completely. The first major client, TechSpan Logistics, sent a thank you email along with a new order worth over $3.2 million. I didn't hold any press conferences, no cameras or media to bask in praise. What I needed was not short-lived applause. It was long-term recognition, through real power, through signatures on agreements, and through a position that no one could easily replace, a position they once refused to grant me. In a regular meeting with the board, Eleanor announced to the entire room, in just 10 days, Director Mia Carter's team has completed the restructuring of the pricing system ahead of schedule and restored the entire data chain that the previous department had lost. Iron Line will continue to implement this system across the entire Northeast and Midwest markets starting next month. All eyes were on me. No more pitying looks, no more forced smiles, just a genuine silence. The kind of silence you get when people realize they were wrong. Bryce was no longer present. According to internal sources, he had been placed under investigation with 3 charges: financial fraud, abuse of power, and intentional falsification of technical records. I didn't ask for details. I wasn't happy either. I just felt relief. It was as if a layer of toxic air had finally been cleared out of the room where I had worked for a year. But the biggest surprise didn't come from the boardroom. It came from an email sent directly to my work inbox with the subject, Request to verify source code Leia P. I raised an eyebrow. Leia, the name I thought had disappeared from the system after her silent exit. The email was short. Mia, I know I have no right to ask for anything, but I need to verify something. Was the weight edged underscore factor code written by you? I found it in a backup Mark mistakenly sent me, and it doesn't look like any of your code. I didn't respond immediately. I opened the code, scrolled through the lines. Every line felt familiar because I wrote it during a March night when the temperature outside was 96 DEF and I had a fever of 102 DEF. Yet I was still coding with 2 layers of scarves wrapped around my neck. I didn't need confirmation. But I realized something. Even those who had benefited from my work were now starting to question where the line between truth and deceit lay. When I responded, there were only 3 lines. Beth code is mine, and it doesn't belong to anyone else. Thank you for asking. M. Afterward, I instructed the technical team to set up an internal source code validation system using blockchain timestamps to ensure that every line of code going forward would have a verified creative trace. I wanted to make sure that, if I ever left one day, no one could erase my name from what I had built. 3 months later, Ironline held its first internal tech conference, inviting all employees from the larger branches to headquarters. Eleanor was the one to open the speech, but she wasn't the main act. When she introduced me with the phrase, "the architect of the reborn system," I stepped onto the stage to applause, not because I had just fixed something, but because I had led an entire system away from the brink with my hands. Hands that had once been overlooked. I looked around the room, catching the eyes of those who had turned their backs on me, and even those who had silently watched when I was pushed out. But I didn't blame them, because now I didn't need them to define my place. At the end of the event, a young engineer, Jordan, who had only been at the company for 3 months, approached me, still holding a notebook. Mia, I've never seen anyone work like you. The way you rebuilt a chaotic system and turned it into a solid platform, I just want to ask, do you ever think being underestimated was a good thing? I looked at him and nodded. If I hadn't been underestimated, I probably wouldn't have built something worth them looking back at. I left the conference hall with the mindset of someone who no longer needed to fight just to survive. I was no longer the one who had been cast aside. I was the one they had to keep. 3 months after the successful reimplementation of Ironline's pricing system across their entire supply chain, I submitted my resignation. No one tried to stop me. Not because they didn't want me to stay, but because they understood clearly. I had done my part. I had revived a system that seemed dead, reestablished the process, cleaned the data, restructured the team, and most importantly, proved that someone once deemed no longer relevant could be the key to saving an entire business. I left on a quiet autumn afternoon. The ginkgo tree outside the headquarters was turning bright yellow. In the hallway, everyone lined up to see me off. There were no tears, no flowery speeches, just respectful glances and a few tight hugs from those who had stood by me during the toughest phases of the project. Eleanor Riggs called me into her office one last time before I left. Mia, I want to say, I've never seen anyone leave this place with such dignity. I just nodded, no need for further words. We understood each other now. That was enough. The next day, I officially launched Carter Insight and Systems, a strategic consulting firm, specializing in assisting underappreciated small and medium-sized businesses, logistics startups, and technology companies that had lacked the technical voice in their leadership teams. I didn't start by renting a large office or running a grand PR campaign. The first headquarters was a third-floor apartment in Old Town East with a wide wooden table, 2 laptops, and a secondhand coffee machine from Facebook Marketplace. But just 2 weeks in, I signed the first contract. A logistics chain in Minneapolis that was struggling due to manual cost management, and a startup in St. Louis unable to scale due to a lack of route analysis algorithm. I didn't build this company to become another Iron Lion. I wanted to create a place where people like me once were. Overlooked, undervalued, pushed down, could use their abilities to take control of the game. I hired based on attitude and potential, not Ivy League degrees. My first partner, Ayanna Brooks, was a former freelance programmer who dropped out of MIT due to the high tuition fees. She coded like she was composing music. And when I gave Ayana a task to simulate a three-state route, she solved it in 46 minutes using an algorithm I still envy. 3 months later, we had 5 regular clients. 6 months in, Carter Insight and Systems had expanded to 3 states. And when I held the first meeting with potential partners, a familiar face appeared unexpectedly. Mark, former lead engineer at Iron Line. He sat in the first row, waited for me to finish my introduction, then came up and whispered, "Oh, I've left Iron Line. They've fallen back into old patterns. Without you, they still don't understand the real value of people. I'm here asking for a chance." I looked straight into his eyes and smiled. "Here, you don't need to ask, you just need to prove who you are." Mark joined the team, and not long after, those who were once considered surplus in the old system became the backbone of the new system I was building. And we didn't just consult. We worked with clients to build systems from the ground up, retrained technical thinking for management levels, and most importantly, gave them back ownership of their own data and strategies. I never imagined I'd become a founder. When I was at Iron Line, I only thought about surviving and proving my worth. But now, I'm helping dozens of people avoid walking that lonely road I once traveled. One weekend, as I sat reviewing the performance dashboard for 3 recently launched projects, I received a message from an unknown number. "Hello, Miss Carter. This is Ruth Layton, CEO of Pierce Global Freight. I've heard a lot about your company. We need a strong, sustainable solution designed by someone who truly understands the industry. Could you spare some time to discuss?" I looked at the message, and my heart slowed, not from anxiety, but from realizing the journey I had chosen had truly changed the path of others. I set my coffee cup down, opened my laptop, and entered into my calendar. Monday, 10:30. I am meeting with Pierce Global. And I knew this was no longer about revenge or proving my worth. This was the phase where I officially transitioned from being the one pushed out to the one who paved the way. 1 year after founding Carter Insight and Systems, I stood in the main hall of the National Logistics Forum in Chicago, presenting a model for operational cost optimization using real-time stratified data algorithms. Over 400 delegates were present, most of them people who once didn't believe in in-house solutions, and even less in people like me, the ones pushed out by the very systems they served. Behind me, the screen didn't display my degrees or a wall of awards. It showed only one sentence. Solutions don't come from the strongest department, but from the one that understands what's being overlooked. As I stepped off stage, someone in the front row rose to shake my hand. It was Ruth Layton, CEO of Pierce Global Freight, who had signed a system deployment contract with me for 7 distribution centers after just 2 meetings. "Mia, your talk wasn't just technical, it was validation that old thinking truly is obsolete." I smiled. And rebuilding only begins when people start listening to the ones who were once dismissed. After the speech, I returned to our new office, the 5th floor of a restored building in downtown Columbus. Carter Insight had moved in 3 months earlier after expanding into the Southeast market. I no longer worked from the window desk by myself. Now I had a full team. 3 data engineers, 2 systems analysts, 1 legal consultant, and a personal assistant named Nicole, who constantly reminded me to drink water and stop coding after 8 p.m. That afternoon, when Nicole handed me a new contract from a Canadian freight company, I sat alone in the office, sunlight pouring through the windows and landing on the framed quote I'd hung the first day we opened. "No one was born to be drowned by a system. If you're not invited to the table, build your own." I read each word again, and I smiled. Iron Line had taught me bitter lessons, that competence doesn't always beat connections, that loyalty doesn't guarantee recognition, and that silence never equals safety. But those were the very truths that trained me not just to function inside a system, but to build one of my own. I no longer needed anyone's permission to grow. I wasn't left outside executives-only meetings. I didn't have to write code at midnight to prove I was worthy. I wrote because I wanted to. And I led because I understood what was being ignored. During an internal workshop, Ayana, the first developer I ever hired, once asked me, Mia, if you could go back in time, would you choose to leave Iron Line sooner? I didn't answer right away. I looked out the window, where the sunset was painting the rooftops in warm crimson. No, because if I hadn't been pushed out that way, I might never have had the courage to realize I wasn't meant to be a cog in a broken machine. I was meant to design a better one. Sometimes freedom doesn't come from leaving, it comes from rising at the exact right moment with your data, your skill set, and your belief in yourself intact. Carter Insight and Systems is now operating in 5 states, 3 countries, with over 40 businesses using systems our team has built. But what makes me proud isn't revenue. It's not growth charts or top rankings. It's the emails I get from young engineers, the ones rejected for not having the right experience, or the ones who cried after seeing their names credited for the first time in a report they actually wrote. I always reply to them with one line. It's not that you weren't good enough. The old system just wasn't wide enough to hold your value. And maybe that's why I started all of this. Because I didn't just survive a toxic system. I changed it. From the outside. And this time I hold the blueprint, not just for me, but for everyone who was once made to feel like they didn't belong. Mia's story is a powerful reminder that being cast out isn't always the end. Sometimes it's the beginning of becoming who we're meant to be. In a world where talent is too often dismissed by bias and power, she didn't just rise, she built something better. Her journey teaches us that being underestimated isn't something to fear. With resilience and clarity, you can rewrite your role, not as part of a broken system, but as the one who redesigns it. What do you think about Mia's journey and how she turned adversity into her own legacy? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel for more inspiring stories about life, family, and building your own path.